Long before Simon Bolívar, long before the independence movement swept across Latin America, the land that would become Venezuela was already a battlefield of resistance. In the shadows of the Avila Mountains and the dense forests of the Caracas Valley, a fierce warrior named Guaicaipuro rose from the native Teques people and dared to do the impossible. He united warring tribes, he defied the Spanish Empire, and he carved his name into the soul of a continent still struggling to remember the power of its indigenous past. This is the story they tried to bury. The story of Cacique Guaicaipuro. The Spanish conquest of South America was brutal. With fire, steel, and disease, they marched across lands they claimed in the name of God and crown. In what is now Venezuela, conquistadors led by Francisco Fajardo, Diego de Lozada, and others pushed deep into indigenous territory, slaughtering, enslaving, and building forts on sacred ground. Many indigenous groups, fragmented by generations of internal rivalries, fell one by one, but not all of them. In the 1560s, in the valleys near what would later become Caracas, one man saw through the tactics of divide and conquer. His name was Guaicaipuro, chief of the Teques, and he chose resistance over surrender. Born into leadership, Guaicaipuro understood that unity was the only path to survival. For centuries, the Teques, Mariches, Caracas, and other tribes had fought over territory, trade, and resources, but Guaicaipuro saw the bigger picture. He began reaching out to rival leaders, not with threats, but with vision. He spoke of survival, of land, of freedom, and slowly the alliances began to form. With Guaicaipuro as the central figure, an unprecedented coalition emerged. He united the Teques, the Mariches, the Arbacos, the Quiriquires, and several others, an alliance of over 10,000 warriors trained in guerrilla tactics, intimate with the land, and burning with rage over what the Spanish had done. For the first time in the region's history, the native people were no longer fighting each other. They were fighting together. Guaicaipuro understood his enemy well. He studied their movements. He knew they relied on fortified settlements, supply caravans, and alliances with converted tribes. So he attacked not with open warfare, but with ambushes, sabotage, and psychological pressure. In one of his most legendary acts, he led a raid that nearly destroyed the Spanish outpost of San Francisco. His forces burned crops, killed soldiers, and cut off lines of communication. These were not random strikes. They were calculated blows against the infrastructure of empire. Francisco Fajardo, one of the most notorious Spanish commanders in the region, considered Guaicaipuro his primary obstacle. He sent wave after wave of troops into the forests and mountains, hoping to crush the indigenous rebellion. But Guaicaipuro outmaneuvered him time and again. He knew the terrain better. He could vanish into the jungle and strike from nowhere. His warriors became legends among both natives and colonizers, and his reputation spread far beyond the valleys of Caracas. But the Spanish were relentless. When they couldn't beat him on the battlefield, they tried to turn his allies against him. They offered bribes, favors, positions of power. Some tribes began to falter, others gave in. But many stayed loyal, not just to Guaicaipuro the warrior, but to Guaicaipuro the symbol. He represented something they hadn't seen in generations, a united front of indigenous resistance. In 1568, the Spanish governor Diego de Lozada, determined to end the uprising, launched a full-scale campaign against Guaicaipuro. With a force of over 1,000 soldiers and mercenaries, he marched into the mountains. He promised no mercy. This was not a negotiation. It was annihilation. But Guaicaipuro didn't run. He gathered his council, prepared his defenses, and made a final stand in his stronghold at Mariperez. Outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded, he refused to surrender. Spanish troops stormed the village at night, setting fire to huts, cutting down warriors, and closing in on the chief's dwelling. Guaicaipuro fought to the end. According to accounts, he killed several soldiers before being overwhelmed. He died a warrior's death, not on his knees, but on his feet, machete in hand, defending his people to the last breath. The Spanish celebrated. They thought the rebellion was over, but they were wrong. Guaicaipuro had become more than a man. He was now a legend, a spirit of resistance that could not be buried. His name continued to echo in the hills, in whispered songs and secret stories told by the elders. Children grew up hearing tales of the chief who defied the Spanish and paid the ultimate price. Centuries passed. Venezuela changed hands, fought its wars of independence, and tried to reinvent itself. But Guaicaipuro never faded. In the 20th century, during the rise of anti-colonial movements and the search for national identity, his memory surged back into the public consciousness. Statues were erected. Cities and streets were named after him. In 2001, the Venezuelan government officially declared Guaicaipuro a national hero. His remains, once lost to time, were symbolically transferred to the national pantheon in Caracas, alongside the likes of Simón Bolívar. But even then, his story remained incomplete. School books mentioned him, but only briefly. His indigenous identity was often flattened, his rebellion sanitized. What they didn't teach was the strategy, the diplomacy, the raw brilliance it took to unify ancient enemies into a single force against one of the most ruthless empires in history. Guaicaipuro was more than just a warrior. He was a nation builder, a visionary, a leader who believed that sovereignty was worth dying for. He didn't fight for glory. He fought so that his people could live without chains, without foreign gods, without walls cutting through their land. And though his rebellion was crushed, his vision lives on, in the land itself, in the voices of indigenous activists reclaiming their heritage, in the movements pushing back against erasure, environmental destruction, and neo-colonial control. Guaicaipuro reminds us that resistance is not just an act, it's a legacy. He dared to dream of a world where native people could stand together, not as tribes, but as a nation. And for a brief moment in history, that dream was real. His alliance challenged the myth of inevitability, the lie that the conquest was total, or that indigenous people simply vanished. He proved that memory can be a weapon, that history can be reclaimed, that even in defeat, there is a kind of victory in refusing to bow. In every corner of Latin America, there are Guaicaipuros, names lost, battles buried, courage forgotten. But when we speak his name, we speak for all of them. For every leader who stood against the tide. For every community that dared to fight back. For every generation that refuses to forget. Cacique Guaicaipuro's story is not over. Because his fight, for dignity, for unity, for freedom, still lives on. And as long as the land remembers him, so will we.